الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. As we continue in this tremendous treatise entitled Fataawa al-Hamawiyyah al-Kubra by the great Imam Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Abdul Salam ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani al-Dimishqi, the one who died 728 after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. The time now is 7:32 p.m. Thursday, February the 9th. On this evening, according with the Gregorian calendar, Thursday, which agrees with the Tariq al-Hijri on the Islamic calendar, or is technically later to Jumu'ah, the 19th of Rajab, the month before the great month of Sha'ban, the year 1444, after the migration of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. As we continue explaining about the affairs of which the great Imam Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah conveyed upon another great scholar from our religion, who was from the scholars of Qurtuba, but he was originally from Andalus, as he was originally from Spain, and then he migrated to Qurtuba, all those regions and those lands which is today, which is known to us as Spain and Portugal, as those type of lands were under the rule of the Muslims at one point in time. So you'll find that they were scholars, and from them was the great Imam Ibn Abi Zamanin, or Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abdullah Ibn Abi Zamanin, rahimahullah. As we talked about last class, excuse me everyone, where you'll find that Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, was conveying some of his beneficial speech from his book entitled Usul al-Sunnah. We said, in regards to some of what was mentioned, in regards to the other upon Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, all of this is from Ibn Abi Zamanin, which Shaykh al-Islam conveyed. So what we're reading is from what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned. But he's conveying the statements of Ibn Abi Zamanin from the book entitled Usul al-Sunnah. So that's what we are reading right now. This is what we're reading now. Even though we've heard this other, as we know, the other upon the great Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Ghafil al-Hudali, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, which his full name was Abdullah ibn Ghafil al-Hudali, ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Ghafil al-Hudali, which is name, which everyone is known as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiyallahu anhu. He said in that other, بين السماء الدنيا والتي تليها مسيرة 500 عام وبين كل سماء 500 عام وبين السماء السابعة والكرسي 500 عام, to the end of what we mentioned. He said between the lower heaven, meaning the heaven of the dunya, what is next to it, between it is the distance of 500 years. And between each heaven is 500 years. And between the seventh heaven and the kursi is likewise 500 years. To the end of the other. What we wanted to mention is that this particular other does not take the hukm al-rafa. We cannot say it is authentic or is ascribed to the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, due to the fact that we mentioned in this particular chain that was mentioned here in this book by Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, you'll find there's an individual named Al-Mu'alla ibn Hilal. This is who we mentioned yesterday. This is where we stopped. His name was Mu'alla ibn Hilal. Hilal. Ha, lam, alif, lam. Mu'alla, mim, ayn, lam, bi tashdid al-lam, Mu'alla. Mu'alla ibn Hilal. That individual, Mu'alla ibn Hilal al-Hadrami, Abu Abdullah al-Tahan, you'll find that from Ahl Ilm who said he was weak, very weak rather, to the point where he was accused of fabricating hadith. You'll find that the great Imam al-Nasa'i, rahimahullah, said he's matruk, meaning he was abandoned. He was left off, which is the lowest grade of what a person is considered as far as his state in hadith. To the point where the great Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal al-Shaybani, Imam Ahl al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, mentioned concerning him, kullu ahadithihi mawdu'a. All of his ahadith are fabricated. He said, kullu ahadithihi mawdu'a. All of his narrations are fabricated. So, the point of why we mention this, what is the methodology of a lot of the books that we have read, we're acclimated to learning from? Why is those narrations mentioned in those books? That's what we wanted to mention yesterday. This is what we wanted to elaborate on and give details. So we said in this regard, right, everyone, that the affairs of what you'll find, especially this type of shubha or this type of doubt, was mentioned concerning other books of what we study from and what we extract our beneficial knowledge from, and from them is Kitab al-Tawheed by the great Imam Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab. You'll find that there are people out there, of course, with evil intent to try to stir up this type of shanshanat. Try to stir up this type of what? Type of confusion and nonsense by saying there are certain narrations in these books that are weak. So why are they relied upon? And from that is the example we just mentioned here. So why is that the case? We said, we answered this question probably a year ago, and in some of my lessons, maybe 14, 15 years ago, we answered this question. We said that the ulama of the past in regards to Aqidah, they always took the Kitab and Sunnah as a what? As the basis and foundation. You'll find that they mention ayat from the Book of Allah in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of those narrations that are ma'lum as-sihha. They are known and established as far as their authenticity, without any shadow of a doubt. So that is what they utilize as a foundation in regards to their evidences. They never use weak ahadith or mawdu'ah, taking consideration of it being the asas, taking consideration of it being the foundation which is relied upon. So you'll find in those books of Sunnah, and from them is this book Usul al-Sunnah by Ibn Abi Zamani, and also, for example, the books by As-Sunnah by Ibn Abi Asim, which is another book of the Sunnah, which is known. Sunnah by Ibn Abi Asim. And other books of the Sunnah such as Abu Bakr ibn Khalal. Abu Bakr ibn Khalal, which is the great student and partner of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal al-Shaybani. You'll find a lot of a lot of these books containing certain narrations that are weak. Why? If you look at the chapters, they always started these chapters or each chapter in their book with all authentic narrations from the Book of Allah and in the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The thing is, with the scholars of the past, they would bring everything. So they wouldn't just bring what is authentic. They'll bring the ayats are authentic, the ahadith are authentic, and the narrations from the Sahaba. And they will bring those narrations that were weak in order to inform the people that to be careful, because in those weak narrations are what? Correct meanings that are supported by the authentic narrations. Because you have to be careful. Even though a hadith might be what? Da'if, but the meaning of it could be what? Correct, which is substantiated by the authentic what? Proofs, which is obligatory upon you to believe. Because the foundations affirm that particular meaning. Is it clear what I'm saying, or I need to repeat it? So you'll find in those books, because I'm sure that some of our students have knowledge, that when you go purchase books in Aqidah from the past and you will come across, why did this scholar use these weak narrations? You have to know why. This is the reason. This is why I'm explaining it. In order for the shaitan not to throw a shubha in your heart. They bring all the authentic narrations first. They bring the verses in the book of Allah, in the ayat in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. Then the narrations in the authentic sunnah, the message of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, and the athar of the salaf. Those evidences that are concrete and known of its authenticity are relied upon fundamentally and in their foundation. Then you'll find that they bring those narrations that are weak and those narrations sometimes that are fabricated in order to bring what? All the evidences and proofs. And even to teach the reader that be careful. In those weak narrations there are correct meanings that you have to what? Believe due to the fact that the fundamental or the what? The authentic sources affirm this meaning. So those weak narrations are not mentioned as to be relied upon. They're just mentioned in order to what? Basically, as they say, utilize as the icing on the cake. Is it clear? So they're not mentioned in order to be relied upon. They are mentioned, as they say, min bab al-istitnas. Min bab al-istitnas. Meaning, in order was considered to support or put the icing on the cake. Is it clear, everyone? So, you'll find the great Imam Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jami, rahimahullah, he mentioned the exact same answer in regards to Kitab al-Tawheed. When you listen to his durus called Sharh Fath al-Majid. Sharh is explanation of Fath al-Majid by the great Imam Muhammad Aman al-Jami, rahimahullah. He even mentioned the same doubt that was utilized from some of the people, al-Balabi wal-Qalaqil wal-Shanshanat. The people of confusion and chaos and confusion, utilizing these type of doubts in order for them to be alienated or to instill in them doubt so they will not learn from these books at all. So you'll find that the shaitan uses his minions in order to bring about these type of doubts, in order to put confusion in the heart of the Muslim. So as to what? Not to have a strong aversion, not to read those books. Or not to be what? Learn from those books. The great Imam also mentioned, Muhammad Aman al-Jami, he said exactly here, in the same context. He said, in regards to this other of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud that we mentioned, he said the hadith, of course, in regards to the message of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this hadith cannot be what? Considered authentic. It can't. Why? Because it has that individual who is every, that we just mentioned, Al-Mu'alla ibn Hilal, which is that individual is matruk. But we said, he's abandoned, and Imam Ahmad said that all of his narrations are fabricated. Right? طيب. Al-ulama da'iman yuridun hadha al-hadith. You'll find that the great Imam Muhammad Aman al-Jami, rahimahullah, he said the scholars always bring this narration to affirm the characteristic of aboveness for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or loftiness or highness. He says, due to the last part of the narration, where it says that Allah's throne is above water, and Allah is above the throne. And He is totally aware and has full knowledge of what you're upon. Meaning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has full awareness of your actions, of good and evil. This last sentence in this narration of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, that I just said here, that the throne is above water and Allah is above the throne. Right, everyone? That is established in the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His book, وَكَانَ عَرْشُهُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ, that His throne is above water. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in his book. His throne is above water. And if he was to ask the Asha'ira, those who believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everywhere, where is this place that Allah has mentioned in His book saying His throne is above water? Is everywhere? So it says that His throne is above water. That last part, like we said, has been established in the book of Allah and the authentic Sunnah, as the great Imam says. He says, "Tuzkaru min bab at-ta'yid," meaning these type of weak narrations are only mentioned, as they say, to give aid to those what? To those authentic ones, for that aspect of considering it, as we said, the icing on the cake. التأييب بها ما ثبت في الكتاب والسنة لا من باب التأسيس. He said, aiding what has already been established in the kitab and the sunnah, not for the aspect of establishing a foundation from those weak narrations. As I just said, I just gave the example to just give it in simplistic terms, which is what? Icing on the cake. That's it. ليست هي الدليل الأساسي والأدلة قبلها كثيرة في الكتاب والسنة وكما تقدم صفة العلو صفة ثبتت بالكتاب والسنة والعقل والفطرة. As we already established or was already preceded, that the characteristic of Allah being high above the creation is a characteristic affirmed by the kitab and the sunnah and by al-aql al-salim wal-fitrat al-salima, by the untampered with intellect, meaning the intellect that has not been influenced by Greek philosophy, meaning the aql or the rational or the intellect that remained upon its true what? Nature, that has not been what? Influenced. And by the natural inclination and disposition of the human being that also has not been altered and switched and changed and influenced by Greek philosophy and outside influences of this world, will all affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we mentioned, is above the creation. Now he goes on to say what we just said here a couple of minutes ago. He says, وَإِنَّمَا يَتَسَاهَلُونَ فِي ذِكْرِ مثل هذا الحديث إذا كان في الحديث جملة توافق ما جاء في الكتاب والسنة يذكر الحديث بطوله. This is what we mentioned. I'll say it quickly in English because we want to keep moving. He says you'll find that they become lenient after the authentic evidences have been established. And mentioning a hadith similar to this, if the narration has in it a sentence that agrees or what is in the origin of the kitab and sunnah. So the hadith is mentioned in its what? In its length, fully as it came. And like we just gave the example here of Abdullah bin Mas'ud, that the point of evidence that's extracted is the last authentic one that agrees with the authentic sources and proofs. Not relying upon a weak hadith, but rather what? Utilizing it as the icing on the cake, as we just mentioned. He says, so let everyone understand that point in order for when you see narrations in these type of books that you do not become what? In a state of doubt. Is it clear? So even me, when I was in my beginning stages as a student of knowledge, when I was in my teens, and I purchased certain books, and I'm like, why did the ulama mention weak hadith in these books of Aqidah? And I didn't understand it. Then when you go back to the scholars, they say, now go to the beginning of the chapter. What do you see? Ayat, ahadith that are authentic. Exactly. Then you'll find at the end is what? The weak ones are mentioned. As we said, from the aspect of what? Min bab al-istitnas, or min bab, as they say, the aspect of icing on the cake, or teaching the reader that there are narrations that are weak in its chain, but the meanings in those particular narrations are correct, so you have to be careful. Because you might read it and say, oh, it's weak, not realizing that the meaning of the hadith has been established in what is what? In the kitab and sunnah, where you have to believe it and you reject it. You understand? Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? So that's the reason why you'll find that Al-Ilm mentioned those weak narrations in addition to the what? Authentic ones. Is it clear? Jay. So he goes on to say, أهل السنة جرت عادته أتباع السلف إذا ثبت صفة أو حكم بدليل صحيح ثم وجدوا آثارا أو بعض الأحاديث فيها ضعف يذكرون. We already just mentioned this. لأنها ليست هي الأساس. ليست الآثار عن الصحابة ولله الحمد. We just mentioned this. So let's keep going. So let's keep reading what the great Imam Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah rahimahullah, as he continues to convey statements upon another great Imam whose name is Ibn Abi Zamani. So he goes on to say, ثم قال في باب الإيمان بالحجب قال ومن قول أهل السنة أن الله بائن من خلقه يحتجب عنهم بالحجب فتعالى الله عما يقول الظالمون علوا كبيرا ما لهم به من علم ولا لآبائهم كبرت كلمة تخرج من أفواههم إن يقولون إلا كذبا وذكر آثارا في الحجب. So the great Imam Ibn Abi Zamani, rahimahullah, he goes on to say that Shaykh al-Islam conveys here in this book of the Hamawiyyah, قال, he said, from the statement of the people of the Sunnah, of those who's trying to hold on to the truth and meet Allah upon that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who meet Him upon clarity. طيب, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is separate and distinct from His creation, meaning He's not mixed with them. بَائِنٌ مِنْ خَلْقِهِ. So keep in mind the statement, بَائِنٌ مِنْ خَلْقِهِ, separate and distinct from His creation. يَحْتَجِبُ عَنْهُمْ بِالْحُجُبِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remains hidden from them by hijab. By hijab. For verily, may Allah be high above of what the oppressors say about Him, a very what? Uluwan kabira, a lofty highness, or a lofty what? Praise, of being raised above of what they ascribe to Him. Then you'll find that Ibn Abi Zamani, rahimahullah, uses the verse in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Kahf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they have no knowledge of that, do not belong, nor do they own any knowledge of that, nor knowledge they inherited from their forefathers. He says, how huge or magnified of what emanates from their mouths, and they do not say anything except a lie. So notice what was said about the Christians. Ibn Abi Zamani used it for those Muslims who deviated in the affairs of creed. He used the exact same verse. How? Because we mentioned in previous classes, everyone, that the people that have been affected by Greek philosophy say affairs about Allah that is worse than the Jews and Christians. So if it applies to them, then the same ayah can apply to who? To those Muslims who've been affected by Greek philosophy. Is it clear what I'm saying, everyone? طيب. ثم قال محمد بن عبد الله بن أبي زمني. As he goes on to say, في باب الإيمان بالحجب. He says, the affair or the obligation of believing and having faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is behind the hijab. That He's behind the hijab. What does that mean? That Allah is hidden. Allahu yahtajib. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hidden from His creation. احتجب عن خلقه. قال ومن قول أهل السنة. He says, احتجب عن خلقه, meaning He's hidden from the creation, where He says He is separate and distinct from them. What does that mean? Meaning He's not mixed with the creation. He's not within Him, and they are not within Him. He is not, mixed with them, nor are they mixed with Him. Excuse me, everyone. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in the earth, nor is He mixed within the creation as far as in the heavens. Allah is separate and distinct from them. We just read the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Mulk, ayah number 16, أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ. Do you believe in the one who's above the heavens? Meaning He's not mixed within the heavens of the creation, nor is He not mixed within the earth in the human beings or in any places that are filthy. And what is in that meaning of the text? Of course, what comes in the affairs pertaining to being above the heavens that affirms this affair. As we just mentioned, it said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above His creation. He's not mixed with them at all. طيب. So let's keep going. We mentioned it said that the Salaf, from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, this statement, بَائِنٌ مِنْ خَلْقِهِ, is what we want to focus on right now. بَائِنٌ مِنْ خَلْقِهِ. You'll find that the people of doubt, that they say this statement was made, or it was first developed by Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah. Is this statement true? Absolutely not. You'll find, as we mentioned, this statement was from one who lived 500 or 600 years before Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, from the great Salaf whose name is Abdullah ibn Mubarak, rahimahullah, and other than him. From the great scholars of this religion who are considered the mountains and the pillars from the scholars of the past who conveyed the correct belief for the Muslims. And at the head of them was Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahimahullah. From amongst the heads of them was the great Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who mentioned the same exact wording, that Allah is separate and distinct from His creation. But what they'll try to say is now, why didn't they just stick to what was in Kitab and Sunnah? Why did they have to increase it? That's what we're going to explain again. So, you'll find that those who clarify this matter, a complete clarification is the great Imam Muhammad Aman, as he says. He says, قبل ظهور الفتن والأهوى وقبل نشأة علم الكلام ما كانوا يضطرون إلى أن يقولوا إن الله بائن من خلقه. He said that the first Salaf, meaning the Sahaba, and those who follow the Sahaba who are called the Tabi'een, he said before the manifestation of trials and tribulations in belief, meaning before all these atrocities had taken place in confusion, and all these different types of satanic calls and satanic blows or calls from the callers of shaitan, of the devil, and people started to follow their desires, and the development of rhetoric, meaning philosophy and logic, and the Muslims adopting it. Before all this fitan and all these atrocities occurred, and all these problems, no one was in need, from the scholars, from the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, and those who followed them from the great scholars of this religion. They were not forced to say, for example, indeed Allah is separate and distinct from His creation. So keep that in mind. They were not in need of that. They stuck from the wordings that were in Kitab and Sunnah. And they just said the verses such as, for example, in Surah Al-Taha, ayah number 5, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa. For giving an example to everyone. The most merciful above the throne ascended. So they had what? Restricted themselves to what Allah says. And that was it. Is it clear? Or for example, the ayat such as, إِلَيْهِ يَصَعْدُ الْكَلِمَ الطَّيِّبُ. To Allah ascends the good word. So they were not in need of what? Adding on these statements such as separate and distinct from His creation. Is everybody with me so far? طيب. So يكفي في تفسير هذه النصوص تلاوتها لأن الناس لا تزال على الفطرة. He said, due to the fact that they would recite these verses, because the people were still upon what? Their natural disposition. There wasn't anything to corrupt it at that time. There wasn't any, like we said, Greek philosophy being studied and incorporated in the religion. All these satanic ways and methods that have became critical upon the Muslims or detrimental against the Muslims, all those matters were, or all those factors were not present. So they could stick to the Kitab, stick to the Sunnah, and that would suffice them. And that was adequate. Is it clear what I'm saying so far? So, what happened? So a person would say, okay, what happened? Get to the point. Right? He says, لم تتطرق الأهواء ومباحث علم الكلام إلى أذهانها. All the desires, or the follow satanic desires, and the research that the people started to embark upon never came to their minds. He says, so when an abundance of speech became prevalent or widespread in the negation of Allah being above, and Allah ascending above the throne, from these deviant sects that affected them, from them, and at the head of them was the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the Sha'ira, and those who embarked upon their path. What happened as a result of it? Those who followed the correct creed became forced to now bring something what? Of a statement, in order to remove the doubt, such as, for example, indeed Allah is above His throne, separate and distinct from His creation. He says, in order to affirm Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being above the creation, and in order to what? Aid that meaning, and give more clarity. And to also give a meaning in which the text from the Kitab and Sunnah aided. Why? Because there was a reason for it. He said, بَوَقَبْلَ وُجُودِ السَّبَبْ هَذَا الْعِبَارَةِ. He said, before these factors was present of all this evil that became widespread and started affecting a lot of the belief of the Muslims in their hearts towards what the message of Allah was upon, before this reason, they did not need this. They didn't need to say it at all. But however, like we said, once the trials and tribulations and all the whispers of the devil became loud and started affecting a lot of the Muslims, they had to what? Come with something extra. Like Imam Ahmad the great Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal al-Shaybani, Imam Ahl al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, listen to what he says, and I want everyone to write this down. في صفة الكلام, in regards to the speech of Allah, this is what he said. قيل له إن السلف الأول ما كانوا يزيدون على قولهم القرآن كلام الله ولماذا زدتم؟ قال ولماذا زدتم القرآن كلام الله منه بدأ وإليه يعود. قال إمام أحمد لما زادوا زدنا، أي لما زاد القوم في نفي كلام الرب فقالوا الكلام اللفظي ليس بكلام الله بل كلام الله معنى واحد قائم بذاته، وهذا الكلام اللفظي العربي الذي نقرأه ونحفظه وإنما هو دال على كلام الله الحقيقي. To the end of it, that I'm going to explain right now. He said, Al-Imam Ahmad, when the people started confusing and bringing disturbing, satanic speech in order to cause doubt in the Muslims concerning their belief, for example, the characteristic of speech of Allah. For example, it was said to him, the first salaf, meaning the Sahaba, they did not increase or add on to their statement. For example, the book of Allah or the Quran is the speech of Allah. That's it. That's all they used to say. So you'll find Imam Ahmad was asked, why did you add on to the statement? لماذا زدتم? Why did you add on to the statement? For example, what do you mean add on? They said, the Quran is the speech of Allah. From it started, and to Him it will return. From Allah it started, and to Him it will return. So it's asked Imam Ahmad, why did you add on to the statement? He said, when the people increased, we had to what? When they added on to it by causing confusion, we had to add on more clarity. We had to add on, meaning more clarity, to aid that meaning, so the people can understand. And what is the meaning that the Quran is the speech of Allah? From Him it started, and to Him it will return. What does that mean? Meaning that the speech of Allah, that it what? The revelation started from Allah, and it descended from Allah. Meaning Allah entrusted the greatest of the angels that's entrusted with the revelation and to give life to the hearts, which is Angel Jibreel. Because Wahi gives life to the hearts. So the life of the hearts in which the great Angel Jibreel alayhi salam was entrusted with descended with the revelation upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the speech started from Allah. Why did the Salaf say that? Why? Because you'll find that they came with something confusing. They said, for example, the speech of Allah is not what? It didn't start. It started from Allah. Then Allah created something that expressed the inward speech of Allah, which is confusing. Absolutely irrational, absolutely what? Preposterous. Something that was disturbing, they started saying. So Imam Ahmad came and said, listen, nix all that dumb nonsense. The speech of Allah, the Quran is the speech of Allah. Meaning it started with Allah. The revelation started with Allah, and Allah entrusted Angel Jibreel and the other methods of revelation that Imam al-Bukhari put in his book in the Sahih called Bab al-Wahy. But the point of the matter is, all of the revelation started with Allah. What does it mean that to Allah it will return? As we know, that towards the day of resurrection, because we're drawing close to it, day by day, and it's moving very quickly, that before the day of resurrection, there'll be one night where Allah will remove the Quran from the earth, meaning from the hearts of the people, from their memorization and from their memory. It will be totally wiped out. Meaning it will return back to Allah in that instance. Is it clear, everyone? And Imam Ahmad said about this, that the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started from Him, and to Him it will return, meaning that it's not created. It's not created. It started from Him. It will return to Him. And like we said, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we're going to mention in a minute, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true words, not created, and it's not metaphoric, and it's not metaphoric where the inward speech inside of Allah is inward speech similar to whispers. Or that the true speech is what? Kalam nafsi. We'll talk about that in a minute because I don't want to get anyone confused. But the point of the matter is that the Quran is the speech of Allah. From him it started, and to him will return. That was an affair that Imam Ahmad brought as extra clarity when the confusion started amongst the people. Similar to that is this statement that we just mentioned here. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is separate and distinct from His creation, meaning He's not mixed with them at all. So that's the reason why they mentioned this statement and why the Salaf were forced to now bring statements in order to aid those correct meanings that's supported by the Kitab and the authentic Sunnah. So, that is the affairs that we wanted to give an example. Like we said, هكذا لتعلموا أن المؤلفات. Oh, I'm sorry everyone, the time is almost time to stop. Is it, you want to keep going? We'll go for extra 5 minutes. Oof, I didn't pay attention to the time. Is it clear? I'm sorry everyone. Okay, a couple more minutes. طيب. So, for example, you'll find from the Ash'ari, you don't have to write this down. They came with some atrocity that was confusing to the people. They started saying, for example, the words of Allah is not the speech of Allah. Or the Quran, all of that is what? Not the speech of Allah. Rather, the speech of Allah is one meaning that's been established within Himself. Meaning, it did not happen from one time to the next. What do I mean by that? Let's get to the correct belief. Number one, this is quick. I don't want everyone to dig too deep, nor do I want anyone to get confused. The correct belief in regards to the speech of Allah is that it's what? It's a sifa to that and it's a sifa to fi'l. It's a characteristic of Allah's essence as far as the ability was always there. And it's a characteristic of what? Of his what? Of his fi'l. Of the actions of Allah, take consideration that it happens from one time to the next. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, if you notice, for example, I'll give one example. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'raf. Now listen to this. فَلَمَّا جَاءَ مُوسَى لِمِيقَاتِنَا وَكَلَّمَهُ رَبُّهُ قَالَ رَبِّي أَرِنِي أَنظُرْ إِلَيْكَ قَالَ لَن تَرَانِي وَلَكِنْ انظُرْ إِلَى الْجَبَلِ فَإِنِ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانَهُ فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبَلِ جَعَلَهُ دَكًّا وَخَرَّ مُوسَى صَاعِقًا فَلَمَّا أَفَاقَ قَالَ سُبْحَانَكَ تُبْتُ إِلَيْكَ وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ قال يا موسى إني اصطفيتك على الناس برسالاتي وبكلامي وخذ ما أتيتك وكن من الشاكرين. طيب, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know, called Musa to an appointed time to meet with him. Notice it says in the ayah, contemplate what I'm about to say. فَلَمَّا جَاءَ مُوسَى لِمِيقَاتِنَا وَكَلَّمَهُ رَبُّهُ. He says, when Musa came to our appointed meeting place in time, and your Lord spoke to him, meaning that the speech did not happen until Musa came to that place. Simple. Clear. That it did not happen before that. Allah clearly said, when the appointed time between him and Musa happened, meaning the time, Allah spoke to him. Based upon the nonsense of the Mu'tazila, that happened already. It happened in some weird dimension where it all took place at one time. That's why they say it's speech that's one meaning that's established by His essence, meaning it already happened all at one time, which is absolute nonsense. See your faces right here, everyone? Everyone is like, that is absolutely strange. What are you talking about? But that's what they believe. This type of aqidah brings doubt. That's the reason why the majority of Muslims that embrace this nonsense, they all go astray. Majority of them either go astray or they're just Muslims just because of their forefathers. That's it. Not because they have yaqeen. Just because I was just born and this is what my mom and dad used to do. Not because they actually believe it. Because this type of belief, what does it do, everyone? Instills what? Instills doubt. Because it's confusing. But here, when we say Kitab al-Sunnah, clear. When Allah met Musa, He spoke to him. Makes sense. Duh. When it happened, when the meeting in place, once it occurred, Allah spoke to him. And He said, "Oh my Lord, let me look to you." He said, "You will not see me, Musa. However, look to the mountain. If it stays in its place, you will see it." And Allah displayed of what we understand as a fingertip. of what was it displayed and manifested to the mountain until the mountain disintegrated and Musa fell out unconscious. In order to prove to Musa that you, Musa, your physical state cannot withstand the sight of me in this dunya. You're too weak. However, in the hereafter, Allah will change the physical state of the human being in order for it to withstand the sight of Allah. You understand, everyone? Jay. The point of the matter is that the Asha'ira came with this type of confusion. This confusion of what? By saying the speech of Allah is one meaning that's established or carried out by His essence, meaning it happened all at once, which absolutely makes no sense, right? But that this kalam al-lafzi al-Arabi, that this type of Arabic speech that we read and what we memorize, now listen to this other confusion they say, that it indicates that the speech that we read indicates the true speech, or it indicates the inward speech of Allah. So when we read the speech of Allah, that's not the speech of Allah. It indicates what is in Allah, to the end of the nonsense that they mentioned. He said, from when the people start to philosophically rationalize these affairs in this type of way, that's the reason why they negated it, and that's the reason why they started to what? Come with these type of extreme, weird type of concepts, until they went to the extremes of negating the true speech of Allah. That's when the Salaf were forced to say now these type of great statements to defend the book of Allah and the Sunnah, the message of Allah, and from them, as we said, that the speech of Allah, that the Quran is the speech of Allah, truly, not metaphorically, truly. From Allah it started, and to Him it will return. Is it clear, everyone? Play. Let's move on to the last masala. We'll stop. طيب. Allah, the ayah that I just said in Surah Al-A'raf, that applies here. It says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remain hidden. He's hidden from the hujub, that Allah has hijab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a hijab. His hijab is light. In some narrations it says his hijab is fire. Hijabuhu nur. On the night when the Messenger of Allah ascended, after he came back from that long rihla tawila, that long journey, su'ila awwalu usulihi aw fawra usulihi hal ra'ayta rabbak. As we know, when the Messenger of Allah returned from that tremendous, great journey, it was asked as soon as he arrived, did you see Allah? Did you see your Lord? He said, light, how could I see Him? Nurun anna ara. His light, his hijab is light. You also find that the hadith, which is in Sunnah Abi Dawud and others, which is authentic, the warning to the Muslims that when the Dajjal, and Allah knows best, his arrival is more likely coming, because you see all the chaos on the earth, which all is set up for his release. And Allah knows best of when he will be released, but the signs are definitely pushing towards that. At any rate, the Prophet ﷺ talked about the qissa of the Antichrist, the Antichrist, the qissa of the Dajjal. The point of the story is when the Messenger of Allah said this, and we'll stop here, everyone. He said, when the Dajjal, when he's released, he will call to his worship that I'm your Lord. The Prophet ﷺ gave 3 words. If everyone memorizes it, you will understand that he's not your Lord. He said these. Now record this. And this also aids what we're speaking about right now. He said, تَعَلَّمُوا أَنَّهُ لَنْ يَرَى أَحَدٌ مِّنْكُمْ رَبَّهُ حَتَّى يَمُوتَ. The Prophet ﷺ said this short sentence. In order for you to know when the Dajjal is released, he's not your Lord. I don't care what he does. He's not your Lord. He said, learn that none of you will see your Lord until you die. None of you will see your Lord until you what? Until you die. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not seen in this dunya. Why? Everyone? Because nobody physically can stand it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I mentioned in the story of Musa, proved that from what happened with Musa when he fell out unconscious, just by the disintegration of the mountain. And you'll find that Ibn Kathir mentions the tafsir from the Tabi'een, who mentioned that he heard from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed of what we understand. And to Allah belongs the highest example, and it does not resemble the creation, but in order to give an understanding, to say that Allah only manifests to the mountain of what we understand is a fingertip. And by that Allah disintegrated the mountain. And Musa fell out unconscious. In order to show Musa that what? Your physical state cannot withstand it. You cannot take it. You're too weak, Musa. You understand? But in the hereafter, you will what? You will see me. But you'll find that Musa fell out, as it says in Surah Al-A'raf, he fell out unconscious. Until he woke up, and when he came to, he said, "Oh my Lord," he said, فَلَمَّا أَفَاقَ قَالَ سُبْحَانَكَ تُبْتُ إِلَيْكَ وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. He said, "Glory be to my Lord, I make tawbah to you, and I'm the first of the believers." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said something else, and we'll stop here. He said, "Oh Musa, I preferred you over the people by you hearing my speech," meaning you heard my voice. What did he say? He said, I preferred you over the people by you hearing my speech and you being my messenger. Take from what I've given you and be from those who are thankful. That affirms that what? Musa heard the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Heard his speech. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected and chosen Musa to be his Rasul. He said, "Oh Musa, I preferred you over the people. You heard my voice. You heard my speech clearly, by words and by voice. And it wasn't something that Allah created and that thing expressed for Allah. That's nonsense. Clear speech that Allah said directly to Musa. And he said, and I selected you to be my Rasul. Take what I've given you and be from those who are thankful." We'll stop here, inshallah. Any questions about the lesson? Anything, anyone? Is it clear that what we mentioned throughout the class? Is it clear? You sure? Don't be afraid to ask. تفضل كريم.
It's clear, but so are they trying to say that when Allah spoke to Musa and when Allah spoke to Adam,
it happened all at once? When Allah spoke to Musa and when Allah spoke to Adam, it happened all at once. It happened in some weird dimension that nobody knows, in a weird way, where he spoke to all the prophets all at once. That's why they said it's a ma'na al-qa'im بذاته أو معنى القائم أو معنى الواحد, or they say كلام الله معنى الواحد قائم بذاته. He said that it's one meaning that indicates Allah's essence, meaning it was done all at once. It was done because it's what, everyone? It's a characteristic of his essence. They forgot the what? The part I just said where it's a characteristic of his what? Actions. Where it happens from what? One time to what? To the next. See how clear Ahl Sunnah is? As soon as you say it, it's over. As soon as you say the kalam of the Sunnah, oh, that makes absolute sense, 100%. Gives me yaqeen, gives me total surety, it makes sense. But once you start bringing their speech, that's when the confusion occurs. Like, what? Oh. And that's the reason why the majority of Muslims who believe that nonsense, majority of them either what? They either go astray, or they either apostate, or they're just a weak Muslim having doubt, walking around. And I'm Muslim, but I am confused about that. Who wants to be like that? Walking around a Muslim confused, not sure what they're upon. That's a dangerous state. And to meet Allah upon that is even more dangerous. Is it clear, everyone? Any questions about the lesson? طيب نستعفي. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.